The desert wind carried dust across the rocky terrain as Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles. The four-man SEAL team had been moving through the Afghan mountains for 3 hours, their mission clear, but dangerous. Intelligence. Reports indicated a high-value target was hiding in a compound just 2 kilometers ahead. What they didn't know was that they were walking into a carefully planned trap. Morrison led the team with the quiet confidence that had earned him respect among his peers. Behind him, Petty Officer First Class Carlos Ramirez carried the heavy communications equipment, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines above them. Petty Officer Second Class Mike Chen moved like a ghost through the terrain, his sniper rifle secured across his back. The youngest member, Petty Officer Third Class David Park, brought up the rear, his weapon ready and his nerves steady, despite this being only his 3rd deployment. The intelligence briefing had seemed routine. A Taliban commander named Hassan al-Rashid was reportedly meeting with foreign fighters in an isolated compound. The SEALs were tasked with confirming his presence and calling in an airstrike if the target was verified. Simple reconnaissance, they were told. Get in, observe, report back, and extract before dawn. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Morrison felt something wasn't right. The area was too quiet. In his 8 years of combat operations, he had learned to trust his instincts. And, right now, those instincts were screaming danger. The usual sounds of the Afghan night were missing. No insects, no distant animal calls, nothing but the soft whisper of wind across stone. Ramirez tapped his shoulder and pointed to his radio. Comms are getting fuzzy, Sergeant. Might be the terrain, but I'm losing contact with base. Morrison nodded grimly. They were operating in one of the most remote regions of Afghanistan, where satellite coverage was spotty at best. Losing communication wasn't unusual, but the timing felt wrong. Everything about this mission felt wrong. Chen moved up beside them, his face barely visible under his camouflage paint. Movement on the ridge to our east, he whispered. Could be goats, but I'm not seeing any animals. The team froze, melting into the shadows between 2 large boulders. Morrison pulled out his binoculars and studied the distant ridgeline. For several minutes, nothing moved. Then he saw it, a brief glint of metal catching starlight. Someone was up there and they had optical equipment. We're being watched, Morrison said quietly. Could be local shepherds, but we need to assume hostile until proven otherwise. Park shifted nervously behind them. Should we abort, Sergeant? Morrison considered their options. They were still 3 hours from the extraction point, and turning back now meant crossing the same terrain where they'd been spotted. Moving forward meant completing the mission but potentially walking deeper into danger. Command had emphasized how important this target was. Al-Rashid was believed to be planning attacks on coalition forces, and this might be their only chance to locate him. We continue to the observation point, Morrison decided. But we change our route. Chen, you see that dried riverbed running parallel to our current path? Chen studied the terrain through his scope. Yeah, provides good cover, but adds another hour to our movement time. Better slow than dead. Ramirez, keep trying to raise base. If you get through, let them know we've got possible surveillance. The team adjusted their route, moving carefully through the rocky riverbed. The going was slower, but the high banks provided concealment from observation. Morrison's mind raced through contingency plans. If they were being tracked, the enemy might be herding them toward the target compound. It was an old tactic. Let the enemy come to you rather than hunting them down. As they moved, Ramirez continued his attempts to contact their base. Static filled his headset, occasionally broken by fragments of distant radio traffic. The communication blackout was becoming more concerning with each passing minute. Got something, Ramirez whispered urgently. Partial transmission from base. They're saying something about additional hostile activity in our area of operations. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. If base was trying to warn them about increased enemy activity, it meant intelligence had detected something after they'd already departed. The mission parameters might have changed completely. Chen had moved to a position where he could observe their back trail. Sergeant, we've got company. At least 6 individuals following our original route. They're armed and moving with purpose. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. They had hostiles ahead of them, hostiles behind them, and no reliable communication with command. Morrison gathered his team in the shelter of a large overhang. "Here's what we know," he said quietly. "We're being tracked from behind, possibly, herded toward our target. Communications are compromised. Base tried to send us some kind of warning we didn't receive clearly." Park checked his ammunition count nervously. "What are our options, Sergeant? We can try to break contact and extract immediately, but that means crossing open ground with hostiles in pursuit. We can continue to the observation point and complete our mission, but we might be walking into an ambush, or we can find a defensive position and wait for the situation to develop." Chen studied the terrain around them. "If we're going to make a stand, this isn't a bad place. Good fields of fire, multiple exit routes, and solid cover." Ramirez had been working frantically with his radio. "I'm getting stronger signals now. Sounds like there's a major operation happening somewhere in our sector. Lots of chatter about contact with enemy forces." Morrison made his decision. "We push forward to the target. If Al-Rashid is here, he might be planning to move after whatever operation is currently happening. This could be our only shot at him." The team moved out of the riverbed and began climbing toward the compound. The terrain became more challenging, with loose rock and steep grades that made silent movement nearly impossible. Each step seemed to echo off the surrounding cliffs, announcing their presence to anyone listening. As they crested a ridge, the target compound came into view. It was larger than the intelligence photos had indicated, with multiple buildings and what appeared to be several vehicles parked outside. Lights were visible in several windows, suggesting significant activity. Despite the late hour, Morrison studied the compound through his binoculars. Too much activity for a routine meeting. This looks like a staging area for something big. That's when they heard it, the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot echoing across the valley. But the sound hadn't come from the compound below them. It had come from somewhere above them, from the rocky peaks that surrounded their position. "Sniper!" Chen yelled, but his warning came too late. The bullet struck the rock inches from Morrison's head, sending stone fragments flying. The SEALs dove for cover as more shots began raining down from multiple positions in the mountains above them. The sound of gunfire erupted from 3 different positions in the mountains above them. Morrison rolled behind a boulder as another bullet sparked off the rocks where he had been standing moments before. The crack thump of supersonic rounds filled the air, each shot precisely aimed and dangerously close. "Multiple shooters," Chen shouted over the noise. "I count at least 3 positions, 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and directly above us at 12. The team had stumbled into a kill zone. The rocky outcropping where they'd taken cover provided some protection, but they were surrounded on 3 sides by elevated positions. Whoever had set this trap knew exactly what they were doing. The shooters had perfect overlapping fields of fire that made any movement potentially fatal. Ramirez pressed himself against a large rock, his radio crackling with static. "Still can't raise base. We're on our own until I can get a clear signal." Park, the youngest member of the team, was breathing heavily, but keeping his weapon trained on the ridgeline. "Sergeant, how did they know we'd be here? This feels like they were waiting for us." Morrison's mind raced through the possibilities. Either their mission had been compromised from the beginning, or the enemy had superior intelligence gathering in this area. Neither option was good news. What mattered now was keeping his team alive and finding a way out of this trap. Another volley of shots rang out, this time from a 4th position they hadn't detected. Rock fragments showered down on them as the bullets struck all around their hiding spot. The shooters were patient and disciplined, taking carefully aimed shots rather than spraying bullets wildly. This suggested they were dealing with trained marksmen, not inexperienced fighters. Chen had identified the muzzle flash from the nearest shooter. Shooter at 2 o'clock is approximately 400 meters up the slope, using the rock formation that looks like a split boulder for cover. "Can you get a shot?" Morrison asked. Chen studied the position through his scope. "Maybe, but if I expose myself to take it, the other shooters will have clear shots at me. We need to suppress at least 2 positions before I can engage effectively." The situation was getting more desperate by the minute. They were pinned down with limited ammunition, no communication with base, and an unknown number of enemies in superior positions. Morrison knew they had to take action soon before the shooters coordinated a final assault or called in reinforcements. "Park, you see that depression in the ground about 20 meters to our left?" Morrison pointed to a slight fold in the terrain. "That might provide a different angle of cover." Park studied the ground. "Yeah, but it's open ground getting there. That's our next position. Ramirez and I will provide covering fire. You and Chen move first. When you're in position, you cover us." The young SEAL nodded grimly. He understood the risks, but staying in their current position wasn't an option. The enemy shooters were gradually adjusting their aim, and it was only a matter of time before one of their rounds found its target. "On my mark," Morrison said, readying his rifle. 3, 2, 1, go. Morrison and Ramirez opened fire on the known sniper positions, sending dozens of rounds toward the muzzle flashes. The noise was deafening in the narrow valley, echoing off the rock walls. Chen and Park sprinted across the open ground, diving into the depression just as return fire erupted from the mountains. The covering fire had worked, but it had also revealed their exact position to the enemy. Within seconds, all the hidden shooters began concentrating their fire on Morrison and Ramirez's location. Bullets whined off the rocks, sending up clouds of dust and stone fragments. "We've got to move now," Ramirez shouted. "They've got us zeroed." And Morrison grabbed his pack and prepared to run. "Covering fire!" he yelled to Chen and Park. The two SEALs in the depression opened fire, forcing the enemy snipers to take cover momentarily. Morrison and Ramirez broke from their position, running in a zigzag pattern toward their teammates. A bullet cracked past Morrison's ear, so close he could feel the displacement of air. They dove into the depression as more shots rang out. The new position was better, but they were still trapped. The enemy had elevation advantage and superior numbers. Morrison assessed their remaining ammunition, enough for maybe 10 more minutes of sustained fire. That's when Ramirez's radio crackled to life with a clear signal. "Bravo, team. This is base. We've been trying to reach you for 30 minutes. You've walked into a major enemy staging area. At least 20 fighters confirmed in your vicinity." Morrison grabbed the radio. "Base, this is Bravo team leader. We're pinned down by multiple snipers and taking heavy fire. Request immediate extraction support." "Bravo team. Nearest extraction is 3 hours away. Can you hold your position?" Morrison looked at his team's grim faces. 3 hours was a lifetime in their current situation. "Negative, base. We need alternative solutions. What assets do you have available?" "Bravo team, we have fast movers 15 minutes out, but we need you to mark enemy positions for air support." Chen overheard the conversation. "Sergeant, I can spot for the airstrike, but I need to get to higher ground to see the sniper positions clearly." Morrison studied the terrain. There was a small ridge about 50 meters away that would give Chen the elevation he needed, but reaching it meant crossing more open ground under fire. "Too dangerous," Morrison said. "We need another option." Park had been studying their surroundings. "What about that dried creek bed that runs behind us? It connects to the ravine system we used earlier. If we could reach it, we might be able to work our way back toward extraction." Morrison considered the option. The creek bed was about 30 meters away, but it would require all 4 of them to move simultaneously. If the enemy had positioned anyone to watch their rear, it would be a disaster. Another burst of sniper fire forced them to press lower against the ground. The shots were getting more accurate as the enemy adjusted their positions and found better firing angles. "Base, we need those fast movers now," Morrison said into the radio. "We're about to be overrun. Bravo team, aircraft are inbound, but we still need target identification. Without marking, they can't engage near your position." Chen made the decision for them. "I'm going for that ridge. It's our only chance to guide in the air support." Before Morrison could stop him, the sniper was moving, using every bit of cover the terrain provided. He bounded from rock to rock, drawing fire from at least 2 enemy positions. Morrison and the others provided covering fire, but Chen was exposed for long stretches of open ground. A bullet caught Chen in the shoulder, spinning him around, but he kept moving. He reached the base of the ridge and began climbing, his rifle slung across his back despite his wound. "Chen's hit," Park shouted. Should I go after him? Negative. Maintain your position and keep firing, Morrison ordered. Chen reached the ridge and immediately began scanning the enemy positions through his scope. Blood was seeping through his uniform, but his voice was steady over the radio. I've got eyes on all 4 sniper positions, marking targets now for air support. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, mixing with the continued crack of rifle fire. The enemy snipers had noticed Chen's movement and were concentrating fire on his position, but he remained focused on his spotting duties. Morrison knew they were running out of time. The enemy would either overrun their position or call in their own reinforcements. Everything now depended on Chen's ability to guide the airstrike while wounded and under fire. Chen pressed his eye to his rifle scope, fighting through the burning pain in his shoulder. Blood had soaked through his uniform and was beginning to affect his grip on the weapon, but he forced himself to concentrate. Through the scope, he could clearly see all 4 sniper positions that had them pinned down. Hawk 2-7, this is ground spotter. Chen spoke into his radio, using the call sign for the incoming aircraft. I have 4 priority targets for immediate engagement. The voice that came back was calm and professional. Ground spotter, Hawk 2-7, we have you in sight. Send target coordinates. Chen began calling out the precise locations of each enemy position. Target Alpha, rocky outcrop shaped like an eagle's head, approximately 600 meters northeast of my position. Target Bravo, split boulder formation, 400 meters due east. As he spoke, bullets continued to strike the rocks around him. The enemy snipers had identified him as the most dangerous threat and were concentrating their fire on his position. Stone fragments cut his face, but he continued his spotting mission. Below in the depression, Morrison listened to Chen's calm voice providing target data while under heavy fire. The young sniper's professionalism under extreme pressure reminded him why SEALs were considered elite warriors. Even wounded and exposed, Chen was performing his duties with deadly precision. Target Charlie, lone standing rock pillar, 500 meters northwest. Shooter positioned on the backside. Target Delta, cluster of 3 boulders forming a triangle, 700 meters west-northwest. Ramirez had managed to establish better communication with their base. Bravo team, be advised additional enemy forces are moving toward your position from the compound. Estimate 12 to 15 fighters armed with automatic weapons and possibly RPGs. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Not only were they pinned down by snipers, but a larger force was moving to assault their position. They had maybe 10 minutes before being completely overwhelmed. Hawk 2-7 were about to have company. Morrison spoke into the radio. Request immediate engagement of marked targets. Copy ground team, beginning attack run now, keep your heads down. The sound of the approaching fighter aircraft grew to a roar as it dove toward the mountain peaks. Chen continued to spot, making minor adjustments to ensure the pilot had accurate target information. Target Alpha confirmed. Pilot has visual, Chen reported. Cleared hot. The first missile struck the rocky outcrop where the primary sniper had been positioned. The explosion echoed across the valley, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. Morrison felt the concussion wave wash over their position. Direct hit on Alpha, Chen confirmed, moving to target Bravo. But the airstrike had also alerted the larger enemy force to their exact location. Through his binoculars, Morrison could see armed fighters moving up the slope toward them, using the terrain for cover as they advanced. We've got infantry moving up from the south, Park reported. At least a dozen, maybe more. The second missile struck target Bravo, eliminating another sniper position, but the remaining 2 shooters had adjusted their positions and resumed firing at Chen's ridge. The wounded SEAL was becoming increasingly exposed as the enemy focused on stopping his spotting activities. Chen, can you see the advancing infantry? Morrison called. Affirmative, came the reply. They're using that series of terraces about 400 meters south of your position, moving in bounds, good fire discipline. Morrison realized they were facing a coordinated attack. The snipers had been positioned to pin them down while the main assault force moved into position. Someone was directing this operation with military precision. Hawk 2-7, we need you to engage advancing infantry, approximately 15 fighters, moving up the southern slope. Negative, ground team. I'm Winchester on missiles. I can provide gun runs, but I need precise target marking to avoid hitting your position. Chen understood what was needed. Despite his wound and the continued sniper fire, he began directing the pilot toward the advancing enemy infantry. Hawk 2-7. Target is a line of fighters using the terraced positions. They're advancing in 3 groups of 4 to 5 each. The fighter aircraft came around for a strafing run, its 20mm cannon firing in controlled bursts. The sound was like thunder rolling across the mountains. Morrison could see the impacts walking across the slope where the enemy fighters were positioned. Good hits, Chen reported. Enemy advance has stopped. Several casualties visible, but the celebration was short-lived. One of the remaining snipers had managed to get a clear shot at Chen's position. The bullet struck the rock inches from his head, sending sharp fragments into his face and temporarily blinding him in his left eye. I'm hit again, Chen reported, his voice strained. Left eye is compromised, but I can still spot with my right. Morrison made a decision that went against every instinct he had about leaving a wounded teammate behind. Chen, you need to get off that ridge. The snipers have your position dialed in. Negative, Sergeant. The air support needs continuous spotting, and I'm the only one with a clear view of all enemy positions. Park had been monitoring their flanks and spotted new movement. We've got more problems. Looks like some of the infantry survived the gun run and they're trying to flank us from the east. The tactical situation was becoming impossible. They had eliminated 2 sniper positions but still faced at least 2 more, plus surviving members of the assault force who were now moving to surround them. Ramirez had been working with his radio and received more bad news. Base says the extraction helicopter is still 2 hours out. Weather is moving in from the west and they might not be able to fly at all. Morrison assessed their dwindling ammunition supply. Between the 4 of them, they had maybe 5 magazines left. Against determined attackers with superior numbers and positions, that wouldn't last long. Hawk 2-7, how much time do you have on station? Morrison asked. Ground team, I have about 15 minutes of fuel remaining, then I need to return. To base. 15 minutes. After that, they would be completely on their own against an unknown number of enemy fighters in an increasingly desperate situation. Chen's voice came over the radio. Weaker now, but still determined. I've got target Charlie repositioning. He's moving to a better firing angle on your depression. You need to move now. Morrison looked at his remaining team members. Ramirez was monitoring communications and trying to coordinate with base. Park was watching their flanks and counting ammunition. Both were looking to him for leadership in what was becoming an impossible situation. The sound of approaching footsteps and voices speaking in Pashto told them the surviving enemy infantry was getting closer. They were being squeezed from multiple directions and their options were running out fast. Base, this is Bravo team. Morrison spoke into the radio. We need immediate emergency extraction. We cannot hold this position much longer. The response was not what he wanted to hear. Bravo team, extraction assets are still unavailable due to weather. You need to break contact and move to alternate extraction point Charlie. Extraction point Charlie was over 5 kilometers away across difficult terrain. With Chen wounded and enemy forces surrounding them, it might as well have been on the other side of the world. Morrison stared at the radio in disbelief. 5 kilometers to the alternate extraction point through enemy territory with a wounded teammate was essentially a death sentence. But staying in their current position meant certain capture or death when their ammunition ran out. Chen's voice crackled over the radio, weaker now but still functioning. Sergeant, I can see at least 8 enemy fighters regrouping about 300 meters south. They're preparing for another assault. The remaining snipers had also adjusted their positions and resumed firing. Each shot was getting closer as they refined their aim. Morrison knew they had minutes, not hours, before being overrun. Park, what's our ammunition status? Morrison asked. The young SEAL checked his remaining magazines. I've got 2 full mags, and 1 partial. Ramirez has about the same. You're down to 3 magazines total. Morrison did the math in his head. Maybe 180 rounds between the 3 of them in the depression, plus whatever Chen had left on the ridge. Against determined attackers with automatic weapons in superior numbers, it wouldn't be enough for a sustained firefight. Hawk 2-7, what's your fuel status? Morrison called to the pilot. Ground team, I have approximately 12 minutes remaining on station. After that, I'm bingo fuel and have to return to base. 12 minutes. Morrison looked at the terrain between their position and the dried creekbed Park had identified earlier. It was their only chance of breaking contact and beginning the long movement to Extraction Point Charlie. Chen, can you provide covering fire while we move to the creekbed? Affirmative, but I'll need to expose myself to get clear shots at the enemy positions. Morrison understood what Chen wasn't saying. The wounded sniper would essentially be sacrificing himself to give the rest of the team a chance to escape. It went against everything Morrison believed about leaving no one behind. Negative, Chen. We move together, or not at all. Sergeant, with respect, that's not tactically sound. I'm wounded and slowing you down. My job is to provide overwatch while you extract. Before Morrison could respond, Ramirez grabbed his arm and pointed toward the southern slope. Contact. Enemy infantry moving up fast. 8 fighters were bounding up the slope toward their position, using covering fire and movement techniques. That showed military training. They would reach the depression within minutes. Morrison made the hardest decision of his military career. Chen, provide covering fire for 30 seconds, then get off that ridge and link up with us at the creek. Bed. Copy, Sergeant. Beginning suppression now. Chen opened fire with his rifle, engaging the advancing infantry with precise shots. His elevated position gave him perfect angles on the attackers, and Morrison watched through his binoculars as several enemy fighters dove for cover. Move, 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 Morrison shouted. The 3 SEALs broke from their covered position and sprinted toward the creek bed. Behind them, Chen's rifle continued its steady rhythm of accurate fire, buying them precious seconds. Morrison could hear bullets cracking past his head as the surviving snipers engaged them during their movement. They reached the creek bed and immediately took up firing positions to cover Chen's movement. The wounded SEAL was sliding down the ridge using one hand to control his descent, while keeping his rifle ready with the other. Chen's moving, Park reported, but the enemy infantry is closing in on his position. Morrison could see the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. The enemy fighters had split into 2 groups, one pursuing Chen down the ridge, while the other moved to cut off the team's escape route through the creek bed. Hawk 27, we need immediate close air support on the southern slope. Enemy infantry in the open, approximately 200 meters south of the creek bed. Copy, ground team, making my final gun run now. The fighter aircraft dove toward the mountainside, its cannon hammering the rocky slope where the enemy fighters were positioned. The strafing run was danger close, with 20mm rounds impacting within 100 meters of the SEAL's position. Chen reached the bottom of the ridge and began bounding toward the creek bed, but Morrison could see he was struggling. Blood loss was affecting his mobility, and he was moving much slower than normal. Enemy on the ridge, Ramirez shouted, pointing to where several fighters had appeared on the high ground Chen had just vacated. The enemy had superior numbers and was attempting to surround them from multiple directions. Morrison realized they needed to start moving immediately or risk being completely cut off. Ramirez, take point and start moving down the creek bed toward Extraction Point Charlie. Park, your rear guard. I'll cover Chen's movement. The team began their fighting withdrawal, moving through the rocky creek bed while maintaining security in all directions. Chen reached their position, breathing heavily and clearly in pain from his wounds. How bad? Morrison asked, examining Chen's shoulder. I'll make it, but I'm not going to be much use with the rifle. Vision in my left eye is still compromised from the rock fragments. Morrison handed Chen his pistol. Stay in the middle of our formation. We'll provide security while you recover. The creek bed provided good concealment but limited their movement speed. They could hear enemy voices echoing off the canyon walls as the fighters attempted to track their movement. Morrison estimated they had maybe a 10-minute head start before being pursued in force. Hawk 27 departing station, came the pilot's voice. You're on your own from here, ground team. Good luck. The sound of the aircraft engines faded into the distance, leaving the SEALs alone in hostile territory. Morrison checked his GPS and confirmed they were still over 4 kilometers from Extraction Point Charlie, with wounded personnel and limited ammunition. Base, this is Bravo team, Morrison called on the radio. We've broken contact and are moving toward Extraction Point Charlie. ETA approximately 4 hours with wounded personnel. Bravo team. Be advised weather conditions are worsening. At extraction point Charlie. Visibility is dropping rapidly due to incoming storm system. Morrison felt his heart sink. Not only did they have to cover difficult terrain while being pursued by enemy forces, but now weather was threatening their extraction as well. Ramirez had been monitoring enemy radio communications and had more bad news. Sergeant, they're coordinating the search. I'm hearing references to blocking positions and a sweep line moving through this valley. The enemy was conducting an organized manhunt with multiple teams. Morrison realized they were facing a much larger force than initially estimated. The compound they had been sent to observe was clearly a major staging area with significant security elements. We need to change our route, Morrison decided. If they're setting up blocking positions on the main routes to extraction point Charlie, we'll have to take a longer path through more difficult terrain. Chen, despite his wounds, was studying the map. There's an old goat trail that runs along the ridgeline to the north. It adds maybe 2 hours to our movement, but it stays off the main valley floors where they're likely to position their search teams. Park was nervous about the extended route. Can we make it that far with our current supply situation? Morrison assessed their resources. They had limited water, some energy bars, minimal ammunition, and a wounded team member. The temperature was dropping as night wore on, and Chen would need medical attention soon. We don't have a choice, Morrison said. The direct route is compromised, and we can't hold against their numbers if they corner us. As they prepared to leave the creek bed and begin the longer route to safety, Morrison heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of dogs barking in the distance meant the enemy was bringing in tracking animals to follow their scent trail. The distant barking of dogs sent a chill through Morrison's spine. Tracking dogs would follow their scent trail regardless of which route they chose, and with Chen wounded and moving slowly, they couldn't maintain the speed necessary to stay ahead of a determined pursuit. How far behind us do you think they are? Park asked, his voice tight with concern. Morrison listened carefully to the barking sounds echoing off the canyon walls. Hard to tell with these acoustics, but I'd estimate 30 to 40 minutes. Maybe less if they're moving fast. Chen was leaning against the creek bank, trying to conserve his strength. We could try to mask our scent trail. There's a stream that runs parallel to the goat trail. If we move through the water, it might buy us some time. Ramirez nodded toward the wounded SEAL. How long can you keep moving? Be honest. Chen assessed his condition objectively. The shoulder wound isn't life-threatening, but I'm losing blood steadily. The eye injury is affecting my depth perception. I can probably maintain movement for another 2 to 3 hours before I become a liability. Morrison did the math. 3 hours of movement would get them maybe halfway to extraction point Charlie, assuming they could maintain a reasonable pace. After that, they would be carrying Chen while being pursued by enemy forces with dogs. Base, this is Bravo team. We have enemy tracking dogs in pursuit. Request immediate alternative extraction options. The response came back filled with static. Bravo team, all extraction assets are grounded due to weather. Storm system has moved in faster than predicted. Earliest possible extraction is dawn, weather permitting. Morrison looked at his watch. Dawn was still 6 hours away. 6 hours of movement through hostile territory while being tracked by dogs and pursued by an unknown number of enemy fighters. Sergeant, we could try to thin out their numbers, Park suggested. Set up an ambush along their pursuit route. Morrison considered the option. An ambush might reduce the enemy's numbers and delay their pursuit, but it would also consume ammunition they couldn't spare and potentially alert additional enemy forces to their location. Too risky, Morrison decided. We need every round we have, and we can't afford to get decisively engaged. Our mission now is evasion and survival until extraction. The team began moving out of the creek bed toward the goat trail Chen had identified. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks and steep grades that made silent movement nearly impossible. Each step seemed to send small avalanches of pebbles cascading down the mountainside. Chen was struggling more than he wanted to admit. His shoulder wound was affecting his balance, and the eye injury made judging distances difficult in the poor light. Morrison assigned Park to stay close to Chen and provide assistance without making it obvious. Contact rear, Ramirez suddenly called out. Morrison turned to see muzzle flashes in the distance behind them. The enemy had reached their last position, faster than expected, and was firing toward their general location. The shots were going wide, but it meant their pursuers were closer than anticipated. "They're just shooting at shadows," Morrison said. "Keep moving." But the gunfire had another effect. The sound would guide other enemy teams toward their location. Within minutes, Morrison could hear radio chatter echoing off the rocks as multiple teams coordinated their search efforts. The goat trail was barely visible in the darkness, just a worn path along the rocky ridgeline. It provided good concealment from the valley below, but exposed them to observation from the higher peaks. Morrison had to trust that the enemy hadn't positioned observers on the surrounding summits. As they climbed higher, Chen began showing serious signs of fatigue. His breathing was becoming labored, and he was stopping frequently to rest. Morrison realized they needed to find a place to hole up and treat his wounds properly. "There's a series of caves about half a kilometer ahead," Chen said, consulting his map. "We could take shelter and treat my wounds while the pursuit passes below us." Morrison studied the tactical situation. Hiding in a cave would give them time to rest and treat Chen's injuries, but it would also trap them if the enemy brought the tracking dogs directly to their location. "What about the dogs? They'll track us right to the cave entrance." Ramirez had an idea. "What if we split up? 2 of us continue along the trail to draw the dogs away while 2 stay hidden with Chen." Morrison shook his head. "We stay together. Splitting up just gives them easier targets." The barking was getting louder, and Morrison could now hear human voices mixed with the sounds of the tracking animals. The pursuit was organized and methodical, with multiple teams working together to corner them. "We need to disrupt their tracking," Morrison decided. "Chen, how's your knowledge of local wildlife?" Despite his pain, Chen managed a weak smile. "You thinking what I think you're thinking? If we can find some animal carcasses or strong scent sources, we might be able to confuse the dogs long enough to gain some distance." Park looked puzzled. "What kind of scent sources?" Chen explained, despite his weakening condition. "Predator urine, rotting meat, anything with a strong smell that would overwhelm our human scent. In these mountains, there should be wolf dens or bear markings we could use." They continued moving along the goat trail while searching for anything that might help mask their scent. The terrain was becoming more difficult, with narrow ledges and steep drop-offs that made movement dangerous. In the darkness, that's when Ramirez spotted something that changed everything. Movement on the ridge above us. Multiple contacts with night vision equipment. Morrison looked up to see the faint green glow of night vision devices positioned on the higher ground. The enemy had anticipated their route and positioned blocking forces ahead of them. They were being herded into a trap. "We're cut off," Morrison realized. "They've got teams behind us with dogs, teams above us with overwatch, and probably teams ahead of us at the extraction point." Chen leaned against a rock, his strength fading rapidly. "Sergeant, you need to leave me here. Take the radio and keep moving toward extraction. I'll delay the pursuit as long as possible." "Not happening," Morrison said firmly. "We all go home, or nobody goes home." But their options were becoming extremely limited. The enemy had superior numbers, better knowledge of the terrain, and tracking assets that made evasion nearly impossible. Morrison's mind raced through their remaining choices. "Base, this is Bravo Team. We are surrounded by hostile forces and have wounded personnel, requesting immediate emergency support of any kind." The radio crackled with static before a new voice came through. "Bravo Team, this is Colonel Martinez. We've been monitoring your situation. Help is coming, but you need to hold your position for 90 minutes. Morrison felt a surge of hope mixed with desperation. "Colonel, we're nearly out of ammunition and have multiple enemy teams closing on our position. Not sure we can hold for 90 minutes. "Understood, Bravo Team. Find the best defensive position you can and prepare for a long night. The cavalry is coming." Morrison looked at his exhausted team. Chen was barely conscious. Park was down to his last magazine, and Ramirez was struggling with the heavy radio equipment. 90 minutes might as well be forever in their current situation, but they were SEALs, and SEALs didn't give up. Morrison began scanning the immediate area for any position that might give them a tactical advantage. If they were going to make their last stand, they would make it count. The sound of enemy voices was getting closer, mixed with the continuous barking of the tracking dogs. Whatever help was coming, Morrison prayed it would arrive in time. Morrison spotted a cluster of large boulders about 50 meters ahead that formed a natural fortress. The rocks created overlapping fields of fire while providing solid cover from multiple directions. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best defensive position available. There, Morrison pointed. We make our stand in those rocks. The team moved quickly toward the boulder formation. Chen was barely able to walk now, supported by Park on one side and Ramirez on the other. Morrison covered their movement, constantly scanning for enemy contacts on the surrounding ridges. They reached the rocks just as the first enemy fighters appeared on the trail behind them. Morrison counted at least 6 visible contacts, with the barking dogs indicating more teams approaching from different directions. Get Chen into the center position, Morrison ordered. Park, you take the eastern approach. Ramirez, cover the western flank. I'll handle the main trail. Chen collapsed against the central boulder, his face pale from blood loss. Give me a rifle, he said weakly. I can still shoot. Morrison handed him a weapon, knowing Chen's deteriorating condition made him more of a liability than an asset. But every SEAL fought until the end, regardless of their physical state. The first shots came from the ridge above them. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as enemy fighters began engaging their position. Morrison returned fire, trying to conserve ammunition while keeping the attackers at bay. Contact east, Park called out. 3 fighters moving through the rocks, about 100 meters out. Contact west, Ramirez added. At least 4 fighters trying to flank our position. Morrison realized they were surrounded. Enemy teams had positioned themselves on all sides of their defensive position. The tactical situation was hopeless, but they continued fighting with the determination that defined their unit. Bravo team, this is Colonel Martinez, the radio crackled. What's your current status? Taking fire from multiple positions, Morrison replied between shots. We're surrounded and low on ammunition. How long until support arrives? 60 minutes, Bravo team. Can you hold? Morrison looked at his team's grim faces. 60 minutes was an eternity in their current situation. We'll do our best, sir. The enemy fire was becoming more coordinated and accurate. Bullets sparked off the rocks around them, sending up clouds of dust and stone fragments. Morrison could hear orders being shouted in Pashto as the attackers prepared for a final assault. Chen managed to engage 2 fighters who had gotten too close to their position. Despite his wounds and failing vision, his shots were accurate and deadly. The enemy advance stopped momentarily as the fighters took cover. Good shooting, Morrison said. How many rounds do you have left? Maybe a dozen, Chen replied. After that, I'm down to my sidearm. Park was engaging targets on the eastern approach when his rifle jammed. Weapon malfunction, he called out, switching to pistol. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were down to pistols and a few rifle rounds against an unknown number of enemy fighters with automatic weapons. Morrison knew they had minutes, not hours, before being overrun. That's when they heard it, the distant sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the canyon walls. Morrison's heart leaped with hope, but he knew the sound could also be enemy reinforcements arriving. Bravo team, this is Rescue 6. A new voice came over the radio. We have you in sight. Can you mark your position? Morrison pulled out his last emergency flare and fired it into the air. The red light illuminated their position while also revealing the enemy fighters positioned around them. Visual on your flare, Bravo team. We're coming in hot. Keep your heads down. The rescue helicopter appeared over the ridge, its machine guns already firing at the enemy positions. The night erupted in streams of tracer fire as the door gunners engaged targets all around the SEAL's defensive position. This is it, Morrison shouted to his team. When that bird touches down, we move fast. The helicopter couldn't land in the rocky terrain, but it hovered low enough to drop fast ropes. Morrison could see the crew chief gesturing for them to move toward the aircraft. Chen first, Morrison ordered. Park and Ramirez, get him to the helicopter. Enemy fighters were still shooting despite the suppressive fire from the rescue aircraft. Bullets cracked past them as they ran toward the hovering helicopter. Chen was barely conscious, supported by his teammates as they stumbled across the rocky ground. Morrison provided rear guard, firing his last rounds at enemy muzzle flashes. He watched his team reach the helicopter and begin climbing the fast ropes. Chen was hauled up by the crew chief while Park and Ramirez climbed under their own power. "Sergeant, let's go," the crew chief shouted over the rotor noise. Morrison turned to run toward the aircraft, just as an enemy fighter appeared on the rocks directly ahead of him. The fighter raised his weapon, but Morrison was faster. His last bullet caught the enemy fighter's center mass, dropping him instantly. Morrison reached the helicopter and grabbed the fast rope. As he climbed, he could see enemy fighters emerging from cover all around their former position. The rescue had come just in time. The helicopter lifted away from the mountainside, carrying the exhausted SEALs to safety. Morrison looked down at the rocky terrain where they had made their last stand, amazed that any of them had survived. "How's Chen?" Morrison asked the crew chief. "Medic says he'll make it. Lost a lot of blood, but no vital organs hit. He's tough." Morrison nodded, feeling the exhaustion finally hit him. They had walked into a trap, been outnumbered and outgunned, but they had survived through teamwork, determination, and a little luck. As the helicopter flew toward the forward operating base, Morrison reflected on the mission. They hadn't captured their target, but they had gathered valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities in the region. More importantly, they had all made it home alive. Chen was stable and would recover fully from his wounds. Park had performed exceptionally under fire, proving himself worthy of the SEAL teams. Ramirez had maintained communications under impossible conditions, enabling their eventual rescue. The debrief would come later, along with questions about how their mission had been compromised. But for now, Morrison was content to watch the sun rise over the Afghan mountains, knowing his team was safe and heading home.